guys. It's really good to see you again. And today we're going to be doing another ASMR video. Today, actually, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects as well, which is essential oils. It's actually a really fascinating subject with a lot of facets to it. So today we're just going to go ahead and examine some of the history, and also we're going to examine some of the uses of some of these different scents. Alright guys, so now we have our cup of tea. We can take a closer look at essential oils. And some of the scents I really, really like. Some of them not as much. But we take our tea and we can actually, to really begin to understand essential oils, you need to understand that they've been around since even before the Egyptian times. And they've evolved, changing in taste as time has gone on. But today, we're talking basically about aromatherapy. And not to say these are a replacement for Western medicine, but I find these scents to be very relaxing. And to utilize that, we have something called a nebulizer. This is the nebulizer right here. So, I really enjoy the sound of the nebulizer as the steam comes through here. So, I like to go to sleep with this on. So you put the oil and some water inside of here, and the steam will come out. So we're going to take our essential oils and see what's inside of here. Didn't plan this, but if you can see that, but it says good sleep. So, let's actually go ahead and plug in our nebulizer and put in some water. And then we can talk about each of the scents. But before we do that, I do want to say that essential oils can be made from steam or distillation. And there are various processes that really go into making these scents. So, we're going to really talk in depth about them. Come on, let's go. So, to operate the nebulizer, we're going to go ahead and pour some water in it, and while we talk about each of these scents, we're going to go ahead and put on some vanilla, sort of a woody scent, and really sort of a gentle scent that really helps me get to sleep. So, let's put some water in here. Seven, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And so we'll listen to or smell some vanilla scent. Let's go ahead and turn on our nebulizer here. And we'll go ahead and talk about each of these scents. Okay, so now that we have our vanilla scent, vanilla essence, let's turn on our nebulizer and talk about the mystery of these scents and what they're like. Let's listen to the sound of the steam as the vanilla fills the air. So let's go ahead and start talking about some of these. So to begin with, essential oils are made from various methods. Distillation, solvent extraction, and cold pressing. And a lot of these scents are used in our daily life in various ways. Perfumes, cosmetics, soaps, and even flavoring for food and drinks. But the this is for adding scents to incense and essentially for aromatherapy. So they are made of aromatic compounds. These compounds they do have some medicinal qualities, but it's always better to, turn to Western medicine for the more serious things and whatnot. But for relaxation, these scents are very, very useful. So they were once called aromatic oils. The oils themselves spread and they changed purposes over the years. For example, the scent wintergreen is known as methyl silate. So these chemical compounds are incorporated into other things. But the interest in essential oils is revived. It's sort of an alternative medicine. And you can use these oils diluted in massages and in the air in a nebulizer like this. So you can heat it over a candle flame as well, or burned as incense. So most of these common oils, such as lavender, peppermint, tea tree oil, patchouli, and eucalyptus, are distilled with flowers, leaves, wood, bark, roots, seeds, or peel, and they put it into a distillation apparatus over water. As the water is heated, the steam passes through the plant material. The vapors flow through a coil where they condense back to liquid, which is then collected in the receiving vessel. So, a couple of these distillates are rose water, lavender water, lemon balm, clary sage, and orange blossom. So they do use some of these in herbal distillates as well. So let's go ahead and sort of talk about some of these extraction processes. So, citrus, sort of cold pressed, for example, and the oils are cheaper than a lot of the other essential oils, lemon or sweet orange, which are byproducts of the citrus industry. So these were, before the discovery of distillation, they were extracted by pressing, though. So history really lies with the beginning of humanity, and certain herbs and woods have been used for thousands of years before the Egyptians used them. The idea was, in a broader sense, to ward off evil spirits or cleanse a curse that had made somebody sick or possessed. And the overall history of the creation of essential oils goes back even to cave paintings discovered in the Dordogne region of France. And that actually dates back about 20,000 years. And they show the use of these medicinal plants and oils they created for everyday use. But in the way that we understand it today, oils really began in ancient Egypt, which was the birthplace of aromatherapy as we know it today. The Egyptians cultivated plants for their oils and used them extensively in their religion and their cosmetics as well as for medicinal purposes. So, interestingly, they used it in the embalming process as well. So they used distillation pots that date back even to 3,500 years to essentially use a solvent to extract these oils. And they were renowned for these ointments. In an ancient world, their aromatic oils and the cosmetology, they were well known. They were used to make perfumes, medicines, and incense. They were used on a daily basis. They also made other aromatic vinegars and spices from the plants that grew along the Nile River. However, interestingly, the Egyptians never really distilled their own oils. They imported them from other places, even cypress and cedar. Women would adorn with scented headgear that would melt and release aromas in the extreme heat of Egypt. This was sort of a luxury practice. Egyptians are well known for enjoying the finer things in life. They use them for scented baths, and essential oils would be used actually to protect skin from the sun, because it was very harsh in that environment. So, in 1539 to about 657 BC, the Egyptians had begun to refine the use of oils and aromatherapy. So, one of these was preparation. I'm sure I'm going to butcher the pronunciation here, but Kifi? It was a mixture of 16 ingredients that could be used as incense, perfume, or medicine. So they used these oils, scented barks, resins, spices, in just everyday life. And they were transformed into pills, powders, medicinal cakes, and ointments. The ashes and smoke from aniseed, cedar, onion, grapes, and watermelon were also used. However, during the time of Egypt, the priests were the only authorities allowed to use aromatic oils, as they were regarded as necessary to be at one with the gods. So, interestingly, specific fragrances were dedicated to each deity, and their statues were anointed with these oils by their followers. In fact, pharaohs had their own special blends for meditation, love, war, and so on. Cedar and myrrh were used in religious purposes. And in fact, they can find some of these mummies today. they imported, again, a lot of these, like cypress and cedar. In China, the first use of essential oils was recorded during the reign of the Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor, around 2697. And let's go ahead and actually turn off our essential oils and talk more about this. So, this book that Huangdi wrote was a guideline for many of the Eastern medicine we have today. India also shortly followed suit, and the Vedic literature of the time with over 700 different oils and substances for essential oils and medicines. Some of these included cinnamon, ginger, myrrh, and sandalwood. So, essentially, we can go ahead and move along to the Greeks with the Hippocratic oath, Hippocrates. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that a little wrong, but he was a firm believer in the holistic oils and, in fact, used them on himself. So, the Greeks were the first recorded use of oils, was sort of gifts or trade from the Egyptians, where they were recognized for their uses. And they were used to promote good health and well-being. In 1200 BC, they combined these oils, and Asclepius the Greek became a deity in healing in Greek mythology. Throughout Greece, many temples were named after him, and they were known as Asclepian temples. So, after that, the Alexander the Great invaded Egypt in 300 BC, and the Greeks flourished even more. And it was Theophrastus of Athens, a student of Aristotle, who investigated how aromas and scents from plants could affect humans and how they feel. So he wrote the History of Plants, which makes him considered to be one of the fathers of botany. So it was used for a very long time. Then in about 40 to 90 AD, Dioscorides, who was a Greek physician also, started using, actually he was respected by Nero's army, and he traveled around recording his findings of the habitat of each plant he would thrive and grow in here. And so this helped people understand how plants can be used best. So this included ginger, lavender, olive oil, rhubarb, sesame, and thyme. It's actually exceeded 1,000 different medicine ideas. He was considered by some to be the father of pharmacology. So the Romans, in turn, adopted the Greeks' knowledge, and they were known for lavishly applying these oils to their bodies, bedding, and clothing. They used them in massage and baths, and they wrote books like Galen, written by Galen and Hippocrates. And some of these texts were actually translated into Persian, Arabic, and other languages. So in about 129 to 199, Galen, he really advanced the Roman knowledge with these aromatic oils. continuing along, the Persians, 980, skip a little ahead there, but they also some consider to be the foundation of also, maybe in a modern view, of aromatic oils. And one of these was Ali Ibn, who wrote books on the properties of these plants and their effect on the body. And some of the methods are still in use today. So this continued to Moorish Spain, 1200s, with Ibn al-Baitar, and then even, actually, the Crusaders eventually, when coming into contact with with the Persian Empire, and they brought some of this knowledge back to the West with them, and back from the Holy Land to use in Europe, especially frankincense and pine, which were burned in the streets to ward off evil spirits. So, 1653, Nicholas Culpeper had written The Complete Herbal, which remains one of the most valuable resources for essential oils today. And it describes many of the different uses for these oils. And in the 1800s, the first lab tests on these oils were recorded to look at the antibacterial agent properties of the oils themselves. And then in 1937, it was the French chemist and perfumer René Maurice Gattefossé. And he was, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that last name there, but he was not a big believer in the health movement, but he was interested in the properties of essential oils and what they exhibited. So, 1910, he burned his hand very badly in his laboratory, and being the first compound available, he treated his hand with pure, undiluted lavender oil. And it actually helped heal his hand. So let's go ahead and go through some of these oils here. So, the first oil we have here is Good Sleep. So, let's go ahead and smell it. It smells really, really delicious. And this scent has sage, lavender oils, okay, let's go on to the next one. We have Breathe, which is, let's go ahead and open this and smell it. Yeah, it smells really delicious. It's very relaxing. It's peppermint, rosemary, lemon, and eucalyptus. eucalyptus oils. So, let's go breathe. There's another one. It's called Stress Relief. And let's go ahead and open this up and smell it as well. And this one has geranium, lemongrass, sweet orange oil, so that one's stress relief. Okay, so we have muscle relief, let's go and smell this one as well. Okay, this one has camphor. It's very small text, sorry about that. And eucalyptus, lavender, peppermint, and rosemary. It's muscle relief. Okay. Now, this is an interesting one. We have frankincense. So, frankincense is an aromatic resinous sap of a tree that's found in actually a very specific area. It's very aromatic. This one tree produces the true commercial frankincense. Let's go ahead and open it up here. So this is pure 100% frankincense. And this oil, the sap in the tree, and is found in the southern end of the Arabian Peninsula. The trees are cut with special knives when the sap oozes out. And once the sap is dried in the sun, it is harvested, and essentially they're burned usually as incense because that's the historical methods, but there's other methods as well. So they burn the sap. All frankincense comes from Western Oman, where it is used for everything from deodorant and toothpaste to food and drink flavoring as well. And for a time, frankincense and myrrh were so expensive that in Europe, that southern Arabia became known as Arabia Felix, which is Arabia the Blessed, because it was frankincense was in such high demand from Europe to Asia that the southern Arabia became an integral part of the global economy with shipping connections to India, the Mediterranean, and the Silk Road. So some of the earliest use of the camel actually took place in order to make the overland transport for frankincense and myrrh possible. you could just transport yourself back to that time. And these caravans would stretch for miles across the desert, with camels numbering in the hundreds. A continual stream of caravans made Medina one of the most important global trade centers of its time. So from Najran, the caravans would continue past Mecca onto Medina, which at that time was the most important trade center in the Arabian Peninsula. So from there, the trade routes spread in every direction. And so southern Arabia at that time became a land of fabulous wealth. So for many families and throughout the Mediterranean and the Middle East, unlike today, frankincense was a basic staple just as toothpaste and deodorant, because they did have a religious context. So essentially this shows that, and in fact, interestingly, incense have been around for 2,000 years. They're actually Sumerian tablets showing the name. And this incense was found from frankincense. So the change in climate actually shows that around that time, that's when it became really very popular. So it was shipped out on boats and rafts and shipped to Europe. So the Silk Road would connect to Arabia through these ships in Persia. And in fact, it also traveled to China and India as well. So a very interesting exchange. And it was exchanged for exotic spices. So very, very interesting. The Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians and the Israelites all used frankincense and myrrhs as part of their religious ceremonies. So these played a very important role. The Roman Emperor Nero burned an entire year's harvest in frankincense at the funeral of his favorite mistress, in fact. Frankincense has been used to help with fever, indigestion, chest coughs, those kind of things. And apparently the smoke drives away mosquitoes. So let's move on to the next scent now. So next we have tea tree oil. Let's go ahead and open that up. Now, tea tree oil is from a tree in Australia, New Zealand as well. It's related to myrtle. It's a multi-purpose herb that is used by the Aboriginal people for thousands of years. And they would use the leaves as an antiseptic and antifungal by crushing the leaves and making a mud pack. But it wasn't until the 1770s with the Captain James Cook's expedition where he tried to make an infusion and called it tea tree. And the modern commercial tea tree industry began in the 1920s in Australia. And the properties of this oil are in the leaves, which are steam distilled. So let's go ahead and go to the next one. Here we've got another Australian scent here. So relaxing. Just clear up the chest. And eucalyptus is from the oil glands and petals, and this is native to Australia as well. So there are a few native species to other countries, but they've been used for timber and a lot of other uses as well. Pulpwood. However, they were highly flammable. There's actually some fires have been attributed to them. The Oakland fire back in the day, etc. The oil is readily steam distilled from the leaves and can be used for antiseptic, sweets, cough drops, toothpaste, decongestants. And it's found worldwide now. It's expanded since then. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so now we have cedar wood, which is actually a very interesting scent that has a long history. Let's go ahead and open that up, and we can smell to see what it smells like. So let's go ahead and open this up. Wow. So cedar wood is pressed from a chemically extracted in small quantities from wood roots and leaves from the plants that make this up. And cedar wood was used as a base for paints by the ancient Sumerians. And it was believed that cedar wood was one of the first extracts that man ever used. Early in human history, the oil was used as a sedative and as medicine. There are even texts explaining how cedar wood oil was relatively difficult to extract, and yet early humans used copious amounts of it. In the time of the ancient Egyptians, this oil was used to keep away insects and microbes. The Native Americans used it to clear the mind and calm the spirit. It was used for centuries in India, ancient Egypt, and other parts of Africa and Asia. The essential oil from the cedar trees have been part of religious beliefs and traditions for hundreds of years. In India in particular, they consider cedar to be a holy wood. It's used to build temples, altars, religious blessing ceremonies. But today it's used for its aromatherapy. And so it does have some industrial uses, but it's pretty much, it wasn't until the 40s still was really used in these other things. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. So this one's one of my favorites, and this is rosemary. So it's associated with memory and was used in weddings in the Middle Ages to place in wreaths on the groom and the bride's wreath to help them remember the occasion. And they added it to the wine to help them remember their sacred vows to each other. So, rosemary became known as, took its name from Latin, which means dew of the sea, because it grows along the seashore of its indigenous domain. The Spanish called the plant romero because they believed that another Mediterranean native took refuge beneath a large rosemary bush to shelter herself and her young son as they fled Egypt to escape Herod. So in honor of that woman, the plant became known as Rose of Mary, which was eventually shortened to the modern and familiar to us today use. So it was cultivated in the 13th century in Spain. It was a condiment with salt and meats from the 15th and 18th century. And it was often entwined in wreaths and dipped in scented water worn by brides at the altar. The wreath symbolized fidelity, love, friendship, and the remembrance of the life the woman had led prior to marriage. So, eventually it fell out of fashion to include it in the wedding. So, rosemary is also still a common ingredient in incense used to clean sacred spaces. It was thought to promote prosperity. In fact, 16th century merchants would often hire performers to infuse their shops with spirits of rosemary. The herb was also a popular addition to nosegays, wreaths, and other floral displays. The nosegay that you put under your nose, you don't have to smell the bad things. And it has a lot of uses medicinally. It's one of the first herbs to be printed in England. It was used to boil in water, and it was thought to cure indigestion, migraine, joint disorders, and backaches. So, today, rosemary does have many medicinal properties. It contains salicylic acid, which is the 400 aspirin, so it does have some pain reducing properties. So, I'll move on to the next one. Now we have peppermint. Peppermint is probably one of my favorite scents. And it's just the perfect. It's one that I use a lot in the Nebulizer. So peppermint is one of those things, kind of reminds me of the winter time. So let's go ahead and open it up and smell what it smells like. So peppermint was used actually by Pliny, the elder, if you know him from Pompeii. He was the Roman scientist and historian, and he recorded that the Greeks and Romans used peppermint to flavor sauces and their wines. And also sprays of peppermint adorned their tables as well. Ancient Greek physicians used 2 different species of mint, and it may not actually be the mint that we know today. There is actually evidence that it might be another myriad of other herbs. However, it was mentioned in 13th century in Icelandic pharmacopoeias, but it wasn't until 18th century when it was cultivated for medicinal properties in England. And really in England, the peppermint history was really influential in the world of botany. So, the commercial harvesting of peppermint really began in 1750, and they found that peppermint oil grew pretty well there. So, that said, the peppermint that we know today, it does used in ice cream, candy, fruit preserves, chewing gum, soaps, and has that kind of menthol scent, which really produces a cooling effect for muscle pain and nerve pain and etc. So let's move on to the next scent. Alright, another one of my favorites here, which is sweet orange. Actually has sort of an interesting history for sweet orange. Let's go ahead and open it up and smell it, and then we'll talk about the history. So, that smells delicious as well. Sweet orange has a long history as well. It does actually goes, oranges were considered a luxurious treat throughout history. And one of these was the Romans, as well as the Portuguese. And so it's essentially, it was in the 15th century that sweet orange was brought back from China to the woodland areas of West Africa and Europe. Sweet orange originated in ancient China and was first mentioned in 314 BC. As of 1987, orange trees are actually the most cultivated fruit tree in the world. So, it's actually not a wild fruit, sweet orange. They came from domestication from a cross of a mandarin orange and a pomelo. So, it was in Europe the Moors who introduced the orange to Spain, which was grown in Andalusia, and the large cultivation began in the 10th century, as evidenced by complex irrigation techniques specifically adapted to support orange orchards. And then they continued along to Sicily in the 9th century, and it wasn't until really the 15th century when the Portuguese merchants brought these orange trees back into the Mediterranean area. It was considered a luxury item, and Louis XIV of France had a great love of orange trees. He built the grandest of all royal orangeries at the Palace of Versailles. They potted orange trees in solid silver tubs placed throughout the rooms of the palace, while the orangery allowed year-round cultivation of the fruit to the court. So, Nicolas Fouquet, the financier of the Pope, also was a big fan. And was confiscated from his estate with 1,000 orange trees at one point in 1664. So, Spanish travelers introduced the sweet orange into the American continent in 1493, and there is evidence that Columbus may have planted the fruit in Hispaniola. In the 1500s, they brought sweet oranges to South America and Mexico. Then in 1565 to Florida, when Pedro Menendez de Avilés founded St. Augustine, when the Spanish missionaries brought orange trees to Arizona between 1707 and 1710, while the Franciscans brought it to San Diego in 1769. So actually, an orange orchard was planted near the San Gabriel Mission in 1804, and a commercial orchard actually quite a long time ago, 1841, near Los Angeles. So, separately in Louisiana, oranges were introduced to that area by the French explorers. So, in South Africa, also around the 1700s, got oranges as well. So they essentially became very famous here in Florida at some point, which the seeds were obtained from New Orleans in 1872, and that's when really the orange we know today, the Florida oranges, sort of began. So let's move on to our next scent. So now we have Robbers, which is also known as the Thieves' Scent. And this one is sort of a interesting tale. It's an infusion of cloves, lemon, cinnamon, rosemary, and modern versions of it include eucalyptus, although, of course, at the time, it wouldn't have been available. So it was used to treat people who were sick on their temples, ears, and feet. And it was the scent was used in the tips of the beaks of the doctors who cured the poor. Treated, definitely not cured, but treated the plague. Let's go and smell. So, essentially, this dates to, it's called Thieves' Oil. It dates to 1413, when the Black Death arrived. These thieves would use this oil. They were actually a group of thieves, and they didn't die from the plague, and they were accused of perhaps witchcraft of some sort, and they told them the secret was this oil. So it smells really, really relaxing as well as curing the Black Death, so it's a double win. So let's go ahead and move along here. Just two more here. So, this is a lavender, and this is one of my favorite scents. Let's go ahead and open it up and see what it smells like. So, lavender is thought to be from the Mediterranean, Middle East, and India. And it goes back, it's a history of 2,500 years. Lavender comes from Latin lavare, meaning to wash. And actually the Romans used lavender to scent their baths, beds, clothes, and hair. The ancient Egyptians used lavender for perfume, and the Romans used lavender oils for cooking, bathing, and scenting the hair. And the name is continued through the Middle Ages, medieval and Renaissance times to France, when the women Actually, the women who were washers for hire were known as the Lavenders. So the clothes were washed in lavender and laid to dry on lavender bushes. And it was used to scent drawers, perfume the hair, and ward off infection and heal wounds. So even during the Roman times, it was known for its healing qualities. And the Greeks used lavender to, in fact, fight insomnia and backaches. Lavender is referred to in the Bible as spikenard, which is very interesting. So lavender was also used as a remedy for the plague in London in the 17th century. And the glove makers in France used the perfumes on their wares. Queen Elizabeth of England required lavender at the royal table, and fresh lavender flowers throughout her residence. In the 19th century, Queen Victoria took an interest in lavender, and it became very popular. So many Victorians used lavender in gardens, and both queens used products from a famous lavender company called Yardley's of London. So it was, very popular in Europe, quickly caught on in the United States. So after arriving from England, they grew them to make medicines, and at this point, lavender is worldwide, all over the world. In fact, in France and Provence, the lavender blooms in late June and fills the country markets with a wonderful fragrance. And around the world, there are flower festivals and craft fairs. Now the oil is used for a variety of things, like perfumes and very calming, deeper, longer sleep. Let's go ahead and look at our last essential oil, and then we'll call it a night and get some sleep. And lastly, we have lemon, which is another one of my favorite scents as well. So let's go ahead and open it up and smell. So lemons entered Europe and southern Italy no later than the 2nd century AD, during the time of ancient Rome. But they were not, at that time, widely cultivated. They were later introduced to Persia and then Iraq and Egypt in 700 AD. The lemon was first recorded in literature in the 10th century. And Arabic trees on farming was also used. Strangely, it was primarily used as a ornamental plant in early Islamic gardens, which is how it was considered throughout the Arab world between 1000 and 1150. So, at first, they were not an ornamental plant. The Arabs introduced this plant into Spain in the 11th century. But it wasn't until, in fact, later on, the Crusaders returning from Palestine brought it to the rest of Europe. But it wasn't until the 15th century when lemon came into sort of its full culinary use in Europe. So the first cultivation began in Geneva, in 1493. Columbus brought lemon seeds to Hispaniola. So they did spread that over there as well. And in California even, the first lemons were grown in 1751 and the 1800s in Florida. The name lemon first appeared in 1350 to 1400s from the Middle English word limon. Limon is an old French word. So that indicates that the lemon entered England via France. And the French word is limone, which dates back to the Arabic lemoun, or limoun, from the Persian word limon. So it's been, has a lot of vitamin C and was used 1700s for seamen suffering from scurvy. So it's very, very interesting and complex. So the lemon actually dates even as far back to the Sanskrit word nimbu, which is a generic word for citrus fruit, a cognate of the word lime. So anyway, that all said, it's been really, really nice going through this history and talking about essential oils. So, now that we've learned some of the history of essential oils, let's put some in our nebulizer here. And we can go ahead and put in some vanilla and lavender and relax and go to bed. So, let's turn this on here. And let's go ahead and just listen to the sounds of the nebulizer and try to drift to sleep. You can smell the vanilla. Let's go ahead and just leave this on, and we can slowly drift to sleep and get up close. Six, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And now we'll put in a little lavender as well. Go ahead and turn it back on. And just slowly listen to the sounds and drift to sleep. And we're going to go ahead and turn off the light so that we can drift off and listen to the sounds of this nebulizer. So let's just listen to these sounds. Good night. Well, I think that's been pretty much enough for one evening. It was really fascinating to learn about all the different uses and scents and aromas. It was very relaxing, and we're gonna try to get some sleep because it's a really long night, and we can leave on our nebulizer and fall asleep to that. So, thank you so much for joining me, and